Anyone who's ever done anything worth doing has dreamed big, failed mightily, and mostly started from humble beginnings. This is a podcast about such people. The most fascinating podcast in the world is fascinating because of the stories of the human beings. Hello everyone, it's Pat DiCerbo. The most fascinating podcast in the world has nothing to do with me, but everything to do with the folks that agree to speak to me. And today we have a terrific guest. She is one of the winningest wrestlers in American history and still very young. Her name is Amit Elor. Amit is originally from Walnut Creek, California, and she is really just so impressive. We met in New York City at the Living the Dream Medal Fund after she won the gold medal in Paris this past summer. And at that gathering, they present each of the medal winners with a check, which is super impressive and a lot of fun. Welcome, Amit.
Hi, Pat. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. It's nice to see you. And this just popped into my head. Are you going to go to NCAAs? Are you going to be in Philly at all or no?
I don't think so. I think it's going to go over some training for me, unfortunately. But
okay,
it's going to be
not
cool.
a problem. So I'm in the habit of asking people about their earliest memories. And I know you grew up in California and you have a big family. You were one of 6 children. If I read right, your mom and dad came to California in around 1980.
Yes. My parents came to the U.S. in the 1980s, originally to Boise, Idaho to go to school. And then eventually through transferring, they ended up the California Bay Area.
Understood. And I got to meet your mom in New York City as well. And is she involved in your career? Are you guys a team?
Oh, absolutely. She's a really huge part of my career. Ever since I started wrestling at the age of 4, she is my number one teammate. I think in total, she might have only ever missed one competition during my
Oh my gosh. Well, I could tell you guys were a team. I wasn't sure. It feels to me like she might be your manager as well, like when it comes to meeting people like me and putting you together with people and so on.
Yeah, definitely. She's helped me a lot, both with wrestling and then in other areas of life too.
That's terrific. So what do you remember, like when your earliest memories, say 3, 4, 5 years old, growing up in California?
Well, like you said, I'm the youngest of 6, so I just remember everything being crazy. You know, there's always something happening, whether it was my 3 older brothers fighting over something or spending time with my 2 older sisters. A lot of roughhousing, a lot of games, a lot of exploring outside. We had an Australian Shepherd that was practically my best friend. I loved going on walks with him and just running around. We lived close to a park. And then obviously wrestling. I started wrestling when I was 4 years old. There's pretty big age gaps between me and my siblings. So my older brother started wrestling when he was in high school, but at the time I was 4, he was the first one in our family to try the sport. My mom did basketball growing up, and then my dad did track and field, shot put, and discus. And so wrestling was new to our family. And I just remember going with my mom to watch my brother's practices, and it just looked like the funnest thing I've ever seen. And unlike other sports or attending other events or things I've seen at the time, wrestling, it was almost unbearable to just sit on the sideline and not participate in the practice. It just looked so fun. So for quite some time, I do remember asking my mom, can I practice? And luckily, the club where my brother started training at did have a kids program, but I think it was only allowed for kids ages 5 or older, and I was 4. And my mom told me, you know, if you really want to, just step onto the mat and ask the coach if you can wrestle. And I was a pretty shy kid as far as talking to strangers, but I believe I really wanted to because I just stepped onto the mat and asked the coach. And apparently I was very convincing because they did let me wrestle starting at 4, which was awesome.
What do you remember from your early wrestling practices and competitions?
I remember them being extremely fun. I remember there being all sorts of things from games to gymnastics, and just it felt natural to me from the very beginning. It felt like I could really express myself and let loose on the mat. I loved learning, all the different takedowns and all the different techniques in wrestling and just basics, penetration steps, all sorts of things. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
The screen froze. Yeah, and it was really, really fun. However, I also remember there were no other girls at the time. Initially, I didn't think much of it. I didn't really think much of, difference between boy or girl just starting wrestling, but as I got older, there were definitely challenges in being the only girl. But I think those challenges motivated me to train even harder to prove that I could be there and work with the boys and be just as much of a wrestler as they were. And obviously, where we are at today with women's wrestling is it's just made huge changes and it's grown so much. So these days, when a girl starts wrestling, like most likely she'll have a lot of other girls as her teammates, which is awesome.
It is awesome. It's my understanding that it's one of the fastest growing sports in America right now, if not the fastest.
Yeah, I believe it's currently the fastest growing high school sport, women's wrestling.
Mm-hmm. And I would think college, it's got to be fast too, right? All these programs proliferating.
Yeah, it was just added to the NCAA's this past January, I believe. So it's a big deal. A lot of girls, their dreams are coming true now. So it's amazing.
So you probably have 4 years of eligibility left, don't you?
I think so, but I'm interested just in competing internationally, not in college.
Understood. Do you still work out with boys or men, or do you only wrestle with the women right now? Because you're so dominant, I'm thinking maybe you might work out with the men as well.
No, I have a lot of really great female training partners that do push me,
Mm-hmm.
but I also do work with men. It truly just depends on where I am and which partners are there. And obviously, having guys that are, they feel comfortable wrestling with women, they know how to control their strength, their style matches up well with mine. I do think that, now versus when I was in middle school or high school, it's a little bit more important, especially before competition, that I train with girls leading up to that competition just because I noticed differences in the way men move versus women, and it's really important that I develop the right reactions and everything to wrestle women specifically. I've had times that I did not have women to train with, and then I would go to women's nationals and everything would be very difficult. I'd be like, wait, no, the guys weren't reacting that way. The guys weren't as flexible. The guys just turned when I did this, but the women don't. So there's some differences, and so that's why it is important for me closer to competition, maybe that month or a few weeks leading up to it, that I'm able to train mostly with women. But outside of that, training with men is amazing, and it pushes me so hard. So I think I was just talking about this this morning actually with some of the other girls that went to my wrestling practice, how it's awesome that women can always push themselves by being able to train with men in wrestling.
Mm-hmm. So how old were you when you did your first tournament? Do you remember?
I believe I went to my first wrestling competition relatively quickly after I started wrestling. I must have been 4 or 5 years old at the time. And I remember it did not go well. I believe I was wrestling a boy, and this is kind of how the story was retold from my mom. I don't remember too much from that competition, but what my mom told me was that my opponent's coach was yelling for their athlete the words "kill her" while I was on the mat, and I think as a little girl it freaked me out. And so my first wrestling match just ran off the mat, didn't even wrestle because I heard the coach say "kill her." I was like, "Oh no, don't kill me!" And then I just ran off the mat. So that was my experience in my first competition. And after that, I think I decided that I liked the training, but I didn't want to compete. So I actually didn't start competing in wrestling until I was 10 years old. So there's a little bit of a gap. in that gap, I also did a whole bunch of other sports. One of the sports that I really put a lot of focus in from ages 7 to 10 was judo, and I actually ended up competing a lot in judo during that time. If you would have asked me when I was maybe 8, 9 years old, Amit, what's your biggest goal? I might have told you I want to win the Olympics in judo. So
Mm.
there were some changes that happened along the way, but I feel really thankful to have been able to do all sorts of different sports. Generally, what my schedule was like back then is I would go to school, and then right after school, my mom would drop me off at this community youth center that had all sorts of different sports. So I would go from one class to another until around 9 p.m. at night. And that was my day. It was school and then a whole bunch of different sports, wrestling, gymnastics, rhythmic gymnastics, boxing, taekwondo, judo. There were some special classes too for things like slacklining, and I think there was even dance. It was a pretty cool experience for me because I think I have had teammates that have also started wrestling just as young as me, 4 years old, 5 years old, and a lot of them do end up getting burnt out and they don't end up wrestling when they get older. So I think because I did all those different sports growing up, it allowed me to not necessarily get burnt out from wrestling. And I think also it helped my wrestling, having athleticism in other areas. Obviously, I do think wrestling requires a whole bunch of athleticism, but I think it made me a little bit more well-rounded, and I had a lot of fun.
Mm. At what point did you determine that you would be more of a competitor in wrestling than in judo?
I think it just happened slowly. There wasn't a single moment that I was like, oh my goodness, this is what I'm going to do. I did always dream of going to the Olympics from a very young age, ever since I knew about it, and I was just obsessed with every single Olympics and all the Olympic athletes and all of that. But I didn't even know what sport it would end up being. I just loved sports in general, and I loved working out and challenging myself physically. But slowly, I started leaning towards wrestling, especially starting at age 10. A lot of it had to do with finding the right coaches and the right mentors and training partners to inspire me, because I think some of the problems where I didn't have like a really good training environment, or I would show up and a lot of the boys didn't want to train with me, or sometimes the coaches would be a little bit uncomfortable by my presence back then. And so I think that led me to do other sports. And then after a while, I came back to wrestling again and again and again, because no matter what, it was just my favorite. And slowly I had more opportunities to compete. Sorry, we're in New York City and there's horns and ambulances and all sorts of stuff. But
Mhm.
yeah, so I slowly would compete more and more. And I just wanted to become the best version of myself that I possibly could be. And I guess following each competition, I just always wanted to prove myself and test myself a little more. And, it just happened one step at a time. I got older and there became more opportunities. One coach was like, oh, yeah, there's the nationals in this other state. My mom was extremely supportive. She's like, Amit, do you want to do this? All right, let's go. And, it was difficult. We would sometimes travel for like a day and a half or take all sorts of flights, stay in a motel. I would do multiple divisions and multiple weight classes to make the most out of every competition. So sometimes I would have 15 matches a day, but it really helped me get better, and it pushed me hard. And I just, I kept having fun with it. Time passed, and there was always another goal, another challenge that I wanted to complete.
Interesting. So when you think about your career at the moment, um, I feel like you've done so much in such a short amount of time. Like, do you have some concrete goals of what you might like to achieve in the future, or do you take it kind of one day at a time? How do you look at it?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. I think I have long-term goals, but then I also have short-term goals. And a lot of the times I have those long-term goals in the back of my mind, but I don't I don't consider them when I'm thinking about my short-term goals. So I do prioritize those short-term goals because if those aren't achieved, I can't make it to those long-term goals. So I think a lot of the ways that these past 3 years I've competed so much and achieved so much has been by focusing really on the short-term goals. Because me personally, when I would think about, oh my goodness, I want to win the Olympics, how am I going to do that? It's very overwhelming because there's so much. You need to show up every day, so many little things, so much focus, so much hard work. And so instead I just focus on giving it my all every day and doing the very best I can. And then one day after another, and suddenly you've just achieved so much, improving just slightly every single day. And I think all those little goals help me achieve the bigger goals, whether it's winning a local competition or an international one or a world championship. They all lead and help you prepare for the bigger goals.
Understood. So what are your long-term goals?
Oh, well, after experiencing the Paris Olympics, I gotta say I really did fall in love with the Olympics. I was always obsessed with it, but getting to actually experience it in person, it surpassed my expectations. It was even cooler and more amazing than I ever thought it could be. And so currently, I mean, the next Olympics in 2028 will be in LA, and I'm from California. So my next biggest goal is to continue training. And we're talking biggest goal. Obviously, there's a lot of other goals, but is to hopefully make it to the LA 2028 Olympics and hopefully win another gold.
And in the interim, 3 world championships?
Yes. So those are the short-term goals. Whenever I have the opportunity to compete, an opportunity to hopefully make another world team, represent the US, I will obviously take that and try as hard as I can to make it and to continue achieving things. But I think something that's important for me too is definitely to enjoy the process more, because at the end of the day, those accomplishments, those medals, they fade, and it's just the memories and the experience that really matters. And so I have had a wonderful journey, but I do think there are moments where I have felt burnt out or have dreaded workouts and things like that. And of course, that's part of it when you are working really hard. But I think as of right now, it is really important for me that I am also enjoying the process. And I think, especially with my experience in Paris, I think when I'm having fun and enjoying the process, it really does lead to better performance. Because I'd say in 2024, I had a lot of competitions because I wrestled at 68 kilos and that weight class was not qualified for the Olympics for Team USA. And so there was a wrestle off, and then there was an Olympic qualifier, and then there was the Olympic trials, and then there was getting to compete in the Olympics. But I think leading up through those first 3 competitions, the qualifier, the trials, and all that, I don't think I was enjoying the process. And so when I made that Olympic team, I knew that I wanted to not only do my very best, but I wanted to enjoy the whole entire experience, get to see the Olympic Village, go to the opening ceremonies, even if they go until 1 a.m. at night, go to the closing ceremonies, even if you're running on very little sleep after competition. Take every opportunity that comes at you related to the Olympics, because it's truly once in a lifetime. And gotta say, it was probably the best 2 weeks of my life. I loved it.
How did you make sure you got enough sleep?
Oh, well, there's a huge difference between before competition and after competition. Before competition, obviously, it's the Olympics, so you got to go all out and doing whatever you possibly can to make sure you can perform and feel your best. And so I was pretty careful. I think starting around 3 hours before I would fall asleep, I would put on red light glasses. I wouldn't train right before falling asleep. I wouldn't eat, more than an hour before falling asleep. Some nights I drank magnesium, like a magnesium drink before falling asleep. I was recommended to do that by a nutritionist to help with sleep. My family, we stayed in an Airbnb right outside of the village. So that was also a big thing, not sleeping on cardboard beds, having a comfortable bed. The room that I slept in also didn't have blackout curtains or anything, so there would be light in the room. And so my family and I, we literally put foil over the window to make sure it was pitch black. So all these little things, going above and beyond to make sure that you can sleep well and you are at your very, very best. Because I think my goal before competition in Paris was just to know that I did everything in my power to be my very best and to prepare. And then once I knew I did that, I think it took a lot of the stress away, because if you tried your very best, not just in competition, but to prepare for competition, then I think that does take a lot of the stress away, at least for me personally. So my sleep was great until after competition. After competition, I'd say the night of the finals with drug testing and everything, I was probably out of the arena by 1 a.m. And then there was a UWW wrestling boat that I think a lot of people were there, a lot of USA Wrestling members, a lot of wrestling officials and people like that. They were just all there. So immediately following that, I believe me and other people who medaled, they go to that boat and they just celebrate after winning their medal. There's media there. There's food, even though it's in the middle of the night. So I was there probably until 4 a.m. or so. Took a ride back to our Airbnb, was barely able to sleep because I think I was just on such a high that I just couldn't bring myself to rest. It was just, the whole thing was unbelievable, unreal. And then the next day after you win a medal, I think in any sport really, that whole next day is media from morning to night. And so I woke up 8 a.m. I went into the Olympic Village. They took me and athletes from other sports. I believe this was just Team USA athletes. I think for other athletes it was a different process. But for Team USA athletes, we went in a van that had like blackout windows and everything. And we just went from one place to another pretty much with a whole bunch of different news stations, and we had all sorts of interviews. Then we did something called a Champions Walk, which there was this runway in the shape of an Eiffel Tower that was in front of the Eiffel Tower. And basically you and some of the other people who medaled in your division or in other sports, you get to walk down this runway, and there was crowds and crowds of people surrounding the runway. So they cheer for you, and there's music, and it's so cool. Just you walk down a runway wearing your medal. That was awesome. And then I think on that day at night, we went to the Team USA house, and I believe every country had their own house. So in there, there was a little bit more media to do, but there was also a lot of delicious food. And there was a very large screen that had present events that were happening. So I got to witness more athletes, winning medals, winning gold, and just the large group of people that were just, cheering for them, supporting them. It's crazy, the difference between World Championships and the Olympics as far as that. Although when you think about it, except for the fact that there's less weights, it is almost the same as far as, the people you compete with, but it's so different at the same time. So it's interesting, but I think when it comes down to the competition, there's really no difference. You can't let the idea of the Olympics get into your head as far as that, because it really is just a bracket of 16, which is commonly what you have in World Championships, and one opponent in front of you and 6 minutes on the clock, a wrestling mat, no difference. So when it comes down to that, you do what you know how to do, and that's wrestle.
So when you think in terms of your future, long-term goals, how many years can you do it for in your imagination?
Well, this first Olympics, I'm 21 currently, but I was 20 in Paris this past summer. So definitely LA 2028, I'll be 24 years old. And, I'm taking it one step at a time as far as that. Obviously, I have an idea of where I want to be, but I also know that I change and a lot of things are unpredictable. My goal is just to stay healthy, stay sharp. I know injuries happen, things like that. And hopefully LA goes great. I achieve even more of my dreams, and then we'll see how I feel after LA. Then I will decide what I want to do next. I believe the next one is in Australia in 2032. So, and I'll be 28 years old when that happens. So then I'll decide, do I want to continue? Do I want to move on to something else? Do I want to give back to the sport? Do I want to start coaching? There's all sorts of different options, but I'm pretty young. I have a lot of time to think about it.
Mm-hmm. So how old were you when you sort of got onto the international scene?
I believe my first, well, no, that's not true. Actually, my first international competition was probably when I was 10 years old. I was visiting family in Israel, and I wrestled at a local competition in a city called Ashkelon. So that was technically my first international competition. But later on, in the 14 under division, I went to the nationals, and I qualified to represent the U.S. at U14 Pan Ams, which I believe was in Mexico. So that was really the process of truly representing the U.S. and competing internationally. So I had a match against a girl representing Mexico, and it was just such a cool experience. And then from then on, it just continued. The process of having nationals once a year, trying to qualify for the World Championships, or anything to possibly represent the U.S. at a higher level. And I believe the next year, when I was I believe at 13 was when I did the 14 and under. The next year I was 14, and I believe with a special waiver, I was able to wrestle in the U17 division at the 2019 U17 World Championships in Sofia, Bulgaria. That was my very first World Championships. I ended up taking home a bronze.
Mm-hmm.
It was such a cool experience. Obviously, I think now, even in men's wrestling, but definitely in women's wrestling, Japan is very dominant. Very good wrestlers from there. And so I ended up losing my semifinal to Japan. And it was a good experience for me, because I came home and I was so driven to train and get better and just compete. But then, unfortunately, there was a little bit of a gap with COVID. After COVID, I was 17, and that year I went to nationals, and I qualified for both the U17 and U20 World Championships. There's some rules as far as age that until you are 18 or turning 18 that year, based on your birth date, then you can compete with adults. At the time, I was not eligible to make it for the Tokyo Olympics. I was not eligible to try out, but I was eligible to wrestle in both U17 and U20. So that summer, I went to the U17 World Championships that were actually in the same place as my last U17. They were also in Sofia, Bulgaria. So I got to go back to the same place where I took bronze, and that time I took gold. So it was really awesome. It was really cool for me to know, you are capable of so much more than you think. Just making it to the top of the podium, hearing the United States national anthem play, seeing the United States flag getting raised to the highest position. So it was really awesome. And then about a month later, I had my U20 World Championships in Ufa, Russia. And that was also really cool. I was wrestling up in age again. And it was another chance to prove myself, and ended up taking gold at that competition too. So it was a really cool summer. And the next year I was eligible to compete with adults. So it just continued from there.
It's interesting that they decide when you can compete with adults, because in other sports you could be as young as 14, right? Like gymnastics.
Yeah, I think
14 or 16, I can't remember.
Yeah, maybe I'm not sure. I'm gonna have to ask the people who make the rules, but maybe it's because wrestling is very
More physical.
Yeah, that's my only guess.
So how did you meet Terry Steiner? When was your first introduction to him?
So, like I said, my older brother was the first one in my family to start wrestling. So my older brother continued. My older brother had also the same Olympic dreams as me. He took fourth at the 2016 Olympic trials, but I believe I was 12 at the time, and my brother it was either a training camp or a competition in Colorado Springs. and I tagged along with him. And after some convincing, I was able to join in on the national team women's practice in Colorado Springs while I was there.
Mm.
And obviously, Terry Steiner was there coaching the women as he's been doing for years.
Forever.
Yeah, and so I remember getting to meet him. He's a really, really cool guy. Probably was 12 at the time. Going with all of these older girls, all of these world medalists, world champions. It was very, very cool for me. I was lucky to be able to visit at such a young age and work with those women.
How did you do in that practice?
I did surprisingly well, but I couldn't tell if maybe it was because they were going easy on me or if I was actually doing well. Not sure, but I was a big kid. I was always like the tallest, biggest girl in my class. Grew up very quick. I'd say now I'm not too big compared to like the majority. I mean, in wrestling, I'm probably on the big side, but if we're talking just women, I'm like 5'7". But for wrestling, I was always on the bigger side. And so even at 12, I was already like 140 pounds. So I had plenty of women that were my size. I wasn't too small or anything. So physically, I was able to match up with a lot of them pretty well, I think. But again, I'm 12 years old, all over the place, funky, not really feeling my body just yet. But still, it was a huge challenge, especially coming from wrestling only boys to then being in a room with a bunch of professional female wrestlers.
Mm-hmm. I've asked you a lot of questions. Do you have any questions for me or comments or thoughts about the future that we haven't talked about?
Do you have any favorite wrestlers? Any favorite wrestling moments?
I've been a fan for a long time. I would say my connection to wrestling, more sort of seriously, I guess about 10 years ago, I started to reconnect by going to the NCAA tournament every year, or maybe 15 years ago. And I'm connected to the sport through Terry Steiner, who I know reasonably well. And I know Jordan Burroughs reasonably well. And he's inspiration and, one of the best of all time, if not the best of all time. And his coach, Brandon Slay, and Joey McKenna, and a little lesser in that same club, like I knew David McFadden. I've met Jay Aiello, but I don't know him, and Tyler Berger. And then I know Tom Ryan really well. Tom wrestled my brother in the New York State Championships decades ago. I want to say it was 1986. And my brother was ahead, I think 8-1. And then Tom came back and won in the third period. Because my brother ran out of gas.
Sounds like an exciting match, though.
Yeah, it was very exciting. Tom was in better shape. And he was determined.
Yeah.
There was a lot of tilting going on in that match. Early on, my brother was tilting Tom, and then late in the match, Tom was tilting my brother. I just met Dan Gable recently. In fact, I interviewed him on my podcast. That's not yet posted, but it was a fascinating interview. He's very articulate and very deliberate. He has a great memory.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it was pretty neat. I recommend it. One question I asked him happened to be about Terry Steiner, where I said, Terry told me that he felt like you cared about him. He said, but also the guy in front of him was ranked number 1 in America. So at the same weight class in the same room, Terry Steiner was probably maybe the 3rd or 4th or 5th best wrestler going into the season, but the number 1 ranked wrestler was in his weight class in the same room. But Terry felt like Coach Gable cared about him. And I said, how did you do that with everyone? How did everyone feel like you cared about them, given that everyone's fighting for the same spot? And I imagine you experience something like that in the room. I know you probably have your own coach. Is that right? Or do you only have the world team coach?
I've had just a lot of different coaches over the
Okay.
years. Yeah.
So it's kind of weird. Like a lot of people have their own coaches, but then when you go to the world team, then you have Terry Steiner as your coach, but you may not see him that often, depending on how much time you spend in Colorado Springs. And but Dan Gable explained it by saying, I ranked the wrestlers number 1 to number 30 at the beginning of the year, and I would meet with them each individually and say, you're ranked number 30 in this example, but you can't be happy being number 30. Your goal has to be to getting to number 29 or better. Now, I don't know what he said to the number 1 person, like, you better fight like hell to stay where you are. Number 2, he wanted everyone to try to move up. And it was that was his way of communicating what he wanted and encouraging each person. And no matter where you were on the depth chart, if you will, he wanted you to want to be better. And I used the word fairness, and he hesitated, and he said, I'm not sure I've always been fair. And he said, but those are judgment calls that you make. You know, should I have a wrestle off? I forget what he called it. He didn't call it a wrestle off. He called it something different. But, you know, theoretically, someone should be able to wrestle off for the weight class every week, right? But it's 2 out of 3 matches, and it's, you know, live wrestling, easy to get hurt.
Yeah.
And some of your wrestlers, as you know from the teams you've been on, some people really know how to perform at a high level in competition. And other people are really good in practice, but they fold in competition. And so if you're the coach, how do you decide who's going to go? And if you do a wrestle off and wrestler A beats wrestler B in the room, how do you justify taking wrestler B to the competition? So it was just really interesting. And you know, I was implying, because the only feedback I've gotten is just from a few of his wrestlers over the years, Terry being the person I know the best. And he said, well, you're only talking to Terry, more or less. He said, you're talking to Terry. He said, not everyone liked me. And then he gave an example. He said, I met this kid in the weight room last year. I was at University of Iowa, and he was ticked off at me. He was angry with me for something that had happened 20 years ago. And he said, I saw it as an opportunity to remedy the situation. And I said, he just wanted to know that you cared about him. Whatever happened long ago, he was carrying that around with him. He was hurt. And he, you know, of course, Dan already knew the answer. He's a Swami. He said, yeah, of course. He just wanted to know. And he said, I think I fixed it. But you never know. But he seemed happier when I left. He was very candid. It was great. I really enjoyed it. And as it turns out, he's coming to Albany, New York in the near future to be with us in our office for a day.
Oh, Dan Gable?
Yeah.
Oh, that's going to be so cool.
Yeah, it is. I'm sure we can learn a lot.
Yeah.
Just and he also talked about when he lost his final, he was 181-0 and between high school and college. And then he lost his last amateur match, so to speak, or collegiate match, folk style match, to this guy, Larry Owings, as you probably know. And he said, as much as I hated to lose that match, you know, it was predictable. I was doing interviews all week long on Wide World of Sports or for the whole tournament, he said. And I wasn't really paying attention to my wrestling. And I was exhausted. When I got to the match, I was physically exhausted. He's like, never in my life do I remember feeling tired and thinking to myself, I'm tired during a match. So he talked about that. And then he talked about how important it was that he lost that match, because if not for that, then he would have never become the wrestler he became. He said, without that match, I'm not an Olympic champion. So,
true.
So maybe you got more than you bargained for on that answer, but I don't know a ton of wrestlers other than by reputation. And I love to hang around them when they'll hang around me. Like occasionally Jordan Burroughs will have breakfast with me or something, or Brandon Slay or Joey McKenna. I don't know if I mentioned Joey in that long list, but I know him very well.
Mm.
And he's recently made a move, as you know, or as you may know. And so I can't wait to see him wrestle. And I'll be at there's 2 tournaments. Final X is in Newark, New Jersey. And then before that, I think it's the U.S. Open in Las Vegas, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm hoping to go to those 2 tournaments.
Yeah, I believe too, for the weights that don't have anybody sitting out, there's also World Team Trials. So for the weights, yeah, so we'll see how it all plays out. I know that the year after the Olympics is interesting. A lot of people tend to make moves. Some people retire. It's different.
No doubt.
We'll see how everything plays out.
Yeah, for me, it's fun because I was never a great wrestler. I was a good high school wrestler, at least by my definition. That varies depending who you're talking to. I watch these kids who have been 2, 3, 4 times state champions wrestle in the NCAA and get their butts kicked. And on the international level, too. I'm thinking to myself, I never won a state champ. I never even made the states. And here these guys are, super athletes, and they just get handled. It's fascinating to me. I love the sport. And I love the fact that, like talking to you about just this never-ending quest to be better, no matter how good you become.
Very true. Yeah.
And I feel like that's a mindset that can help us no matter what we do for the rest of our lives.
No, I agree. And I believe it's a quote by Dan Gable, actually, that once you've wrestled, everything else in life is easy. I think life is still hard, but I do feel like wrestling helps me so much in other areas of life. When I've been through preparing for the Olympics, those really tough practices where all you want to do is just go home. All you want to do is quit at any moment, and you keep pushing further and further. And when your brain tells you to give up, you just continue. When you make it through practices and experiences like that, and then you face other challenges in life, I think it makes you very strong mentally and prepared for a lot of different things that life can throw at you. So I think it's the sports really, it gives you a lot. Absolutely.
No doubt. Most of us have no idea what we're capable of. And we settle for wherever we are often at times. And you could apply that to almost anybody, no matter where we are. And I'm just, in my life, both personally and professionally, I just want to keep pushing the rock up the hill. I want it to be hard. I want to do hard things. I don't know how well I would do in a wrestling practice at this point. It's been a few years, but I still do full triathlons. In fact, you can see my bike behind me there. Can you see that?
That is so cool. Wow. That's definitely on my bucket list. Either one day, hopefully completing a triathlon or running a marathon,
Yeah.
Something
piece of cake for you. Compared to what you're doing, like mentally, it's all just mental. True. If you believe you can do it, you can do it. At this point, I've started 20 fulls and finished 19. So my mind kind of knows I can do it.
You've trained your mind. Yeah.
Yeah. And my body knows, I guess, too. It just follows along.
From my
if I think I can't do it, then probably I can't. Either way, I'll be right.
Yeah. But I do think from my experience, it is all mental until it comes down to getting injured. And then it is physical. And the more you train, the worse it gets. So that's the tough thing, because I think wrestling teaches you to just keep working harder, don't stop, do the hard things, which most of the time is the case, right? And that's our natural instinct. But a lot of times that is also what gets us injured. So I think what I've learned is, like, when I have gone to that higher level, making the world team, making the Olympic team, things like that, you need to be more careful when you decide to push. And then there's the peaking and the hard training weeks, and knowing when to step off the mat, being comfortable missing practices, because your body will actually be at more of an advantage if you do physical therapy or something else instead. So there's all those situations that are confusing when you're initial instinct is just push, push, push. But then you see sometimes that you have more of a benefit from not pushing. So it is interesting that game back and forth. And then, of course, I mean, it's amazing when you do get to that level. The team of people you have behind you, the strength coach, sports psychologist, nutritionist, multiple wrestling coaches, mentors. It's endless. And so I truly think it's a very cool experience just having that whole team behind you, because you see just one athlete, but it's always so much more than that. The journey that led up to that moment for the athlete, and of course every single person that's helped make that athlete who they are that in that moment.
No doubt. And it ebbs and flows, right? Everyone's on sort of a sine wave in life. So sometimes you're going up, sometimes you're going down, and people are ebbing and flowing at different times. So when you're doing well, maybe someone needs your help and vice versa. And I feel like that's the power of a team.
Yeah.
And the U.S. women's program, at least from a leadership standpoint, seems great to me. I mean, I'm a big fan.
Yeah,
Got to meet you and Helen, and who else was there? Was Kennedy there?
Yeah,
I can't remember. I met Kennedy as well.
Sarah Hildebrandt, I think she got caught in a snowstorm, but
Okay.
she just recently she announced her retirement after winning Olympic gold, full career. And then she recently became our national, I think, assistant national team coach. So she will be coaching us alongside Terry, which is so cool because she was, my teammate at the past few world championships and then at the Olympics. And then now she's in that coaching position. So she truly understands what we've been going through. But at the same time, I know she's so technical and she has so much to give. So I think it's we got very lucky to have her make that decision.
That's terrific. Is there anything you might like to ask me in addition to the question you asked? You got a long-winded answer. You might want to be careful.
Let me think. Do you like any other sports other than wrestling? I mean, obviously you said you do triathlons, but are you a fan of any other sports?
Not really.
Not really?
I mean, wrestling's my sport. I love it. I like to watch college football, but I don't really know what I'm watching. I never played football, and I can kind of follow the game. But if you were a football player, you're watching a different game than I'm watching. Kind of like if I watch a wrestling match with someone who never wrestled, I'm seeing a different match. Yeah. And then you're seeing a different match even still because your wrestling acumen is higher. And I suppose you could say that about any two people, but in general, I feel like I understand wrestling pretty well. And I enjoy the fine points of it and the hand fighting, the positioning, all of it. It's just fascinating to me. It's like and the athletes are just superbly conditioned, and they could do a lot of different sports.
That's the cool part about
choose to be wrestling. They could be ballerinas. They're so talented. They could be gymnasts. They're amazing.
Yeah. No, I think that is really cool. Like, I think, how this past Olympics had break dancing, and I know with social media and everything, I heard a lot of people talking about how you look at, the gymnasts and you compare them to the break dancers, and a lot of them were like, the gymnasts could do any of those breakdancing moves. Why have breakdancing? I mean, I saw some people talk about that. Obviously, it's different, but I feel like wrestling is kind of similar in the sense that if you took a young wrestler and you pushed them towards another sport, they probably would end up eventually becoming relatively successful at that sport, just because of how well-rounded you have to be to wrestle and how athletic you have to be in shape and all that. So,
yeah, it's a great combination. It's a very cerebral sport. It's a very, you need it all. And then wherever you're weak, you have to make up. You have to have your strengths be stronger so they can sort of make up for your weaknesses. And it's very strategic. It's like chess, And I just love it. But I'm in the habit of also asking another question, and that is, are you familiar with a hyphen? Like a dash in the English language? So I like to say, yeah, a dash or a hyphen is the most important punctuation in the English language. Do you know why?
Because of continuation?
Because it's what's between your date of birth and your date of death.
A dash.
The dash, the hyphen.
Mm-hmm.
So it's between when you were born and when you die.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were to sum up your life, like for someone who didn't know you, say in the future, when you're long gone, what would you want them to know about Amit Elor?
She lived a happy life. She lived to her fullest. My computer froze, sorry. I definitely do want to be known for more than just wrestling. There's so much more I want to accomplish. I want to make a difference in other people's lives, however I possibly can. I want to just live an impactful life, however I possibly can. I do feel like I am still starting out, but I do know that I want it to be impactful. Maybe ask me in 25 years the same question. But yeah, thank you.
I think I will. Hopefully I can ask you in 25 years. Do you have any ideas what you might like to be doing after wrestling?
I have a lot of interests in psychology. I definitely want to continue my schooling. I have about 2 years of community college credits, but it's been a difficult decision because my goal was to transfer to university as a transfer student, but I'm still in the process of deciding where to wrestle because there aren't as many options for women's wrestling right now. As far as training centers and things like that, obviously going down the college path is there, but one step at a time. I do hope for there to be something more established in California, but at the moment, I think ever since I was 14, I've just been jumping from one place to another for wrestling, whether that's New York or Colorado or internationally, and I think it's been really fun, but at the same time, I do hope to have more of a training base, and instead of jumping around from one place to another constantly all year, having one base that I can consistently train, go to school, everything in one place instead of these online classes and these flights every 1 or 2 weeks. But yeah, I a lot of different interests.
Yeah, that sounds like it's a lot to deal with. Finding training partners and coordinating that with your education, because you can't just train with anyone, right? You need someone who's going to challenge you.
Yeah, it depends. I think you need also variety. One amazing training partner. Still, if you train with the same person for weeks and weeks, eventually it's not as beneficial. It's not good because that person will have specific things they do and you'll adjust only to that. But yeah, it's a challenge a little bit, but at the same time it's fun.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like it's made you, I would imagine, made you very independent and resourceful and resilient.
True.
Well, thank you so much for being with me today. And I look forward to seeing you at some point on the international circuit or at the US Open or at Final X. And we'll be sure to say hello then.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yes, ma'am. Take care.
Bye, care.
Amit.
Bye.
You still there? If you enjoy the most fascinating podcast in the world, please follow on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube, and follow on Apple Podcast.